Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are looking at a narrative that is so deeply embedded in our cultural consciousness. It's just, well, questioning, it feels almost like questioning gravity.
Yeah, it really does.
You know the story. We all know the story. It's the ultimate tale of the teenage mastermind.
The kid who beat the system.
Right. A kid who, before he was even old enough to legally buy a drink, supposedly faked his way into the cockpits of major international airlines.
Waltzed right into operating rooms as a supervising physician.
Talked his way into elite legal offices, and forged millions of dollars in bad checks all over the globe.
It's the perfect story.
It is. It was so perfect it became one of the most famous Hollywood films of the early 2000s. But, and this is what we're getting into today, what happens when the architect of the world's greatest con pulls off his ultimate masterpiece?
By convincing the entire world that his totally fabricated autobiography is actual historical fact.
Exactly. So our mission today, for you listening, is to completely deconstruct the life, the lies, and the enduring legacy of Frank Abagnale Jr.
We are looking at the man behind the myth.
And to do that, we are leaning heavily on this massive stack of sources. We've got the meticulous investigative work of journalists who they refuse to accept the legend at face value.
People who actually did the math.
Right. We are looking at Javier Leiva's incredible work on the Pretend podcast, which really blew the doors off this thing. Hit over 5 million downloads in 2024.
Phenomenal reporting.
We're also drawing extensively from Alan C. Logan's 2020 investigative book, The Greatest Hoax on Earth.
Which is just a masterclass in archival research.
It really is. And alongside those, we'll be examining local news coverage of Abagnale's recent 2025 speaking engagements, his keynotes from massive cybersecurity conventions, and I love this part, so highly technical breakdowns of vintage printing and mid-century check forging techniques.
Yeah, establishing that technical and analytical foundation is absolutely crucial because this deep dive isn't just about recounting an entertaining sequence of events, you know.
Right, it's not just a recap.
No, it's a rigorous exercise in critical thinking. We are exploring the literal mechanics of misinformation, how a lie takes root, how it's fertilized by media complicity, and how it eventually blossoms into accepted history.
I like that. Fertilized by media complicity.
Well, it's true, and we will be examining how financial fraud actually operated within the physical constraints of the 1960s banking system, and how those same vulnerabilities have evolved into the digital threats you face today.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the legend itself.
Yeah.
The Hollywood myth that has been etched into stone.
The origin story.
Right. To understand why the public bought it, we have to look at the origin he sold them. According to the widely accepted narrative, this all begins in 1948 in Bronxville, New York.
Okay.
Abagnale has long claimed that his descent into a life of grand deception was triggered by the traumatic divorce of his parents when he was in his early teens.
Right.
He paints this vivid picture of a devastating family fracture that sent him spiraling completely out of control, forcing him to rely on his own wits to survive in a world that had abandoned him.
It is the classic broken home trope.
It really is.
Which is incredibly effective for building a sympathetic anti-hero. I mean, if you want the audience to root for a criminal, you first have to establish that the society or the family structure failed them.
Exactly. And according to the myth he constructed, his very first foray into financial deception actually targeted his own father.
The gas card story.
The gas card story. Now, just for some necessary historical context based on the records, his father was heavily involved in local Republican politics at the time and was running a stationary business.
Right.
But the dynamic Abagnale describes is one of neglect and opportunity. The story goes that at just 15 years old, his father gave him a gas station credit card to help him get around town.
But he didn't just buy gas.
No. Instead of just filling up his tank, he claims he orchestrated this relatively sophisticated kickback scheme with the local gas station attendants.
At 15.
At 15. He would charge a significant amount to the card for expensive items like tires or heavy auto parts. The attendant would ring it up, hand young Frank a fraction of that sale in raw cash, and the attendant would pocket the rest.
It's presented as this brilliant, precocious little racket, a teenager manipulating the adults around him.
Yes, and the result, according to the legend, was that he racked up a $3,400 bill on this single credit card, leaving his father completely on the hook for the debt.
In the 1960s, that is an astronomical amount of money.
It really is. And when the scheme was discovered, it supposedly served as the catalyst for him running away to Manhattan to begin his life as an international imposter.
The psychological framing here is so vital to understand. This origin story deliberately presents a boy turning to his own intellect for survival.
Yeah,
We are culturally hardwired to be fascinated by the trickster archetype. We love the clever rogue who beats the massive, faceless establishment using nothing but supreme confidence and a perfectly tailored suit.
absolutely. And the most critical pillar of this myth, the absolute cornerstone of his public acceptability, was his repeated, vehement insistence throughout his entire career that he never hurt everyday people.
The Robin Hood angle.
Yes. He claimed over and over that he never ripped off any individuals. He insisted his targets were strictly large, heavily insured corporations, hotels, massive airlines, international banks.
That specific framing is what allows the public to grant him a moral pass. By defining his crimes as strictly corporate, it removes the human victim from the equation.
Right.
It makes the theft feel like a victimless game of high-stakes chess, rather than a predatory act. I mean, if the victim is a multinational bank, the public doesn't feel empathy for the institution. They feel admiration for the audacity of the thief.
And the audacity he claimed to possess was genuinely staggering. Let's look at the pilot persona, because this is the absolute zenith of the Abagnale legend.
This is the one everyone knows.
It is. He claimed that early on in his check-cashing spree, he realized a fundamental truth about human psychology, which is that people defer to authority.
They see a uniform, they stop asking questions.
Exactly. He realized he could cash far more bad checks with far less scrutiny if he dazzled the bank tellers with an impressive, authoritative uniform. And in the 1960s, there was no uniform more glamorous or respected than that of a Pan-American World Airways pilot.
You really have to put yourself in the mindset of the 1960s aviation culture to understand why this would theoretically work.
Oh, absolutely.
Commercial air travel was still incredibly glamorous. Pilots were viewed almost as civilian astronauts. They commanded immense respect.
And Abagnale claimed he just called Pan Am headquarters, confidently stated he was a pilot who had lost his uniform at a hotel, and manipulated the purchasing department into giving him the name of their uniform supplier.
Just social engineering right over the phone?
Yeah. And then he simply walked into the tailor and charged a brand new, perfectly fitted pilot's uniform to the company using a fabricated employee ID number.
Which is just wild to think about.
He described his strategy in a way that is incredibly poetic. I love this quote from the sources. He called himself a bumblebee in Pan Am's honey hive.
A bumblebee in the honey hive.
Right, because the legend states that he didn't just wear the suit to cash checks. He used it to infiltrate the airline industry itself.
Deadheading.
Yes. He supposedly faked a Federal Aviation Administration pilot's license and exploited deadheading. For you listening who might be unfamiliar, deadheading is the standard industry practice where off-duty pilots and flight crew catch free rides in the spare jump seats of commercial planes to get to their next assigned departure city.
So by presenting himself as an off-duty Pan Am pilot needing to urgently travel for a flight assignment, he claimed he was welcomed into the cockpits of rival airlines all over the world.
The statistics he threw around were just phenomenal.
Millions of miles.
Literally. He claimed that between the ages of 16 and 21, he flew over 1 million miles to 26 different countries, eating expensive meals, staying in luxury hotels, all billed directly to Pan Am.
And he supposedly did all of this without ever knowing the first thing about operating a commercial aircraft.
There's even that famous cinematic anecdote where he claims he was actually sitting in the cockpit during a flight, and the actual pilot asked him to take the controls for a moment.
Oh yeah, and he just flips on the autopilot?
He just nonchalantly flips on the autopilot and hopes for the best. It's an image that is so perfectly thrilling that you desperately want it to be true.
You really do.
But the ambition of the myth didn't stop at the runway. When the heat from the bad checks and the sheer volume of airline impersonations supposedly got too intense, he claimed he needed to go to ground.
So he pivots entirely.
He shifts gears entirely and moves into the medical field.
Yes. The narrative suddenly jumps from high-altitude aviation to the life-and-death stakes of a Georgia hospital.
Which is just quite the leap.
It is. He claimed that he moved into an apartment complex full of medical professionals, assumed the identity of a doctor to fit in, and somehow found himself hired as a supervising pediatrician working the midnight to 8 a.m. shift at Cobb General Hospital in Marietta, Georgia.
And this is where the story starts stretching the bounds of credulity, even for the most willing audience. I mean, how does an uneducated teenager fake his way through a supervisory role in a pediatric ward for an entire year?
His explanation was always that he relied on his purported photographic memory.
Okay.
He claimed he would spend his off hours in the local university medical library, meticulously memorizing the text of complex medical journals and textbooks.
So memorizing text isn't the same as practicing medicine.
Exactly. And he admitted he didn't actually comprehend the underlying medical science, but he claimed he could rattle off the terminology verbatim to the residents and nurses with such absolute confidence that no one ever questioned him.
Just coasting on sheer bravado.
He described his routine as simply making the rounds, scribbling illegible initials on patient clipboards, deferring complex diagnoses to the interns under his supervision, and just getting out of the way.
Pilot. Doctor. And then, naturally, he transitions to the legal profession, because why not?
Why stop there?
The myth states that he decided to become an attorney, forging a pristine transcript from Harvard Law School. He moves to Louisiana and claims that after studying intensely for just 8 short weeks, he managed to pass the notoriously difficult Louisiana State Bar exam on his 3rd attempt.
8 weeks of study.
8 weeks. And from there, he supposedly secured a prestigious job working directly under the state attorney general at the time, Jack P.F. Gramillion, actively closing dozens of legal cases.
It's the ultimate Renaissance man fantasy filtered through the lens of a con artist.
It really is.
But a legend like this requires a thrilling conclusion. A mastermind isn't truly a mastermind unless he is relentlessly pursued by the authorities and manages to slip through their fingers time and time again.
The daring escapes.
Exactly.
The escapes are what cemented the myth. He claimed that when the FBI finally closed in on him, he executed some of the most audacious escapes in criminal history.
The toilet bowl incident.
The famous airplane toilet bowl incident. He claimed he was in FBI custody, being transported on a commercial flight that was actively taxiing down the runway at JFK Airport in New York.
While it was moving.
While moving. Under the guise of using the restroom, he supposedly dismantled the toilet mechanism, squeezed his body through the incredibly narrow hatch, dropped onto the tarmac while the plane was moving, and vanished into the night.
And later, when he was supposedly incarcerated at the maximum security Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, he claimed he orchestrated another impossible escape.
What did he do there?
This time, he allegedly convinced the prison administration that he was actually an undercover prison inspector working for the federal government.
You're kidding.
No, he claimed he literally walked right out the front door, strolling past heavily armed guards and machine gun towers.
When you lay the entire narrative out end to end, the brilliant teenage origins, the million miles in the air, the midnight pediatric shifts, the Louisiana legal career, and the James Bond-style escapes, it is so undeniably captivating.
It's a great story.
But faking confidence and telling tall tales only gets you so far. To actually fund this supposed lifestyle, Abagnale had to exploit the physical technology of the banking system.
Right, the actual mechanics.
So what does this all mean? How did he supposedly fake these documents? Let's look at the technical mechanics of check fraud, which Abagnale now actually consults on. Because to understand how someone could theoretically cash millions in bad paper in the 1960s, we have to look at how the system functioned before the internet.
This is a critical pivot in our understanding. Check fraud, particularly in the mid-20th century, wasn't just about having a silver tongue. It was a highly technical material crime.
It was about the paper and the ink.
Exactly. And ironically, breaking down these vintage mechanics is precisely the expertise that Abagnale built his modern, highly lucrative consulting career upon.
Let's look at the physical paper of the checks first. I think we tend to take the physical properties of our financial documents for granted, but every detail is an anti-fraud measure.
Down to the edges.
Right. When you look at the technical breakdowns of forgery, there are very specific physical tells. For instance, authentic corporate or bank checks are manufactured with perforated edges.
Because they are printed in massive batches.
Exactly. They're printed in industrial batches and bound into books or sheets, requiring them to be torn away.
And creating that perforation requires specialized industrial-grade die-cutting equipment that your average independent forger simply doesn't have access to, or the capital to acquire.
So what do the forgers do?
When a forger is operating independently, they are typically utilizing standard 8.5 by 11-inch sheets of paper. They format their printing equipment to fit 3 standard-sized checks onto a single sheet, and then they have to separate them.
And without a perforation machine, they have to physically cut the checks apart with a paper trimmer.
Which leaves all 4 edges of the forged check completely, cleanly smooth.
And in the world of banking security, a smooth-edged corporate check is an immediate, glaring red flag.
It's a massive tell.
If a teller is handed a payroll check that doesn't have at least one perforated edge, the statistical probability of it being a forgery skyrockets.
Alongside the edges, there is the texture and weight of the paper itself. In his later security seminars, Abagnale frequently highlighted the double-bonded paper myth.
Oh, this is a great technicality from the sources.
It really is. Double-bonded paper is essentially heavy stock. Think of the thick, high-quality paper you might use to print a formal resume, a wedding invitation, or a high-end business proposal.
Right, it feels expensive.
Exactly. A novice forger often assumes that heavier, thicker paper feels more expensive and therefore more official.
But the reality of banking infrastructure dictates the exact opposite. Banks process millions of physical checks a day through high-speed sorting machines.
And double-bonded paper is simply too thick and rigid.
It jams the mechanical rollers of the automated sorters. Authentic check stock is actually relatively lightweight and has a very specific, almost slightly porous texture designed explicitly for high-speed mechanical processing.
So if a teller feels a check that has the rigid weight of a resume, they know it's fake before they even look at the signature.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the most profound technological vulnerability of the era, and the one that master forgers exploited with absolute precision, involves something called MICR.
Magnetic ink character recognition.
Yes. If you look at the bottom of any check, even today, you will see a strange computer-like font displaying the routing number and the account number. Those numbers are printed using a highly specialized magnetic ink.
And we aren't just talking about a dark pigment here. We are talking about literal chemistry. This magnetic ink is formulated with 50 to 60% iron oxide.
It is quite literally rust suspended in fluid.
Because of that immense iron oxide density, the physical properties of the ink are entirely unique. It is incredibly dull and matte. It never reflects light or appears shiny like standard printer ink.
And the smell.
Yes. If you were to hold a freshly printed check to your nose, the MICR line actually smells metallic. It literally smells like rust.
Wow.
Furthermore, because vintage banking printers used mechanical impact to strike the paper and apply this heavy ink, the MICR line on a real check often has a tactile quality. It might be subtly debossed into the paper from the strike force or slightly raised depending on the printing method.
Now here's where the systemic exploitation gets brilliant. You would logically assume that a dedicated professional forger would go out of their way to acquire magnetic ink.
Right, to make it look as real as possible.
And the sources point out that even in the 1960s, a determined individual could walk into a specialized office supply or banking supply store and easily purchase magnetic ink cartridges. But the true experts intentionally avoided using it.
And the reason why is a fascinating study in systemic latency. It is entirely about exploiting a concept known as the float.
Explain the float to us.
To understand the float, you have to understand the workflow of a 1960s automated clearinghouse. When a teller accepts a check, it doesn't just sit in a drawer. It is bundled and sent to a regional clearing center where massive room-sized computers process them.
The mainframes.
Right. These machines read the magnetic signature of the MICR line at lightning speed to route the check to the correct issuing bank and verify the funds.
So if a forger uses actual magnetic ink on a fake check, the automated computer reads the routing number perfectly. It queries the system, instantly recognizes that the account number is entirely fabricated or deeply overdrawn, and rejects the check within hours.
The banking network is alerted overnight, and the forger's window of opportunity slams shut.
Precisely. But what happens if the forger intentionally prints the routing numbers using regular, standard, non-magnetic black ink?
The check looks visually perfect to the human teller.
But when it hits the automated clearinghouse that night, the magnetic reader scans the bottom of the check and finds nothing.
The machine registers an error. It assumes the original printing was faulty and physically kicks the check out of the automated high-speed sorting line.
It forces a mechanical failure. And when the machine fails, a human has to intervene.
Exactly. The rejected check lands in a physical bin. The next morning, a human clerk has to take that rejected check, physically apply a white adhesive strip, often called a Lundy strip, or a repair strip, over the bottom edge.
And then what?
Then they have to manually re-encode the routing numbers onto that strip using a specialized MICR typewriter so the machine can finally read it.
And that manual human intervention takes time. It introduces friction into a system designed for speed.
That intentional error buys the forger an extra day, sometimes 2 or 3 days, of processing time before the issuing bank ever receives the physical check and realizes it's going to bounce.
That crucial window of time, that latency, is the float.
It gives a mobile forger 48 hours to drive across state lines, hit a dozen more banks in a new city, and cash more checks before the original bounces.
It is a phenomenal piece of reverse engineering.
Yeah.
They weren't just forging paper. They were hacking the logistical workflow of the Federal Reserve routing system.
Exactly.
And what's truly terrifying is that this reliance on systemic latency and human helpfulness isn't a relic of the past. The technical breakdowns we reviewed connect this mid-century exploitation directly to the modern social engineering seminars Abagnale gives today.
The technology has changed, but the human vulnerabilities have not.
Walk us through the anatomy of that modern 15-minute corporate forgery he talks about, because it is chillingly simple.
Well, he routinely points out to his corporate audiences that forging a highly convincing corporate check today takes approximately 15 minutes, and it requires almost no specialized equipment.
Just a phone.
It's just a phone. It relies entirely on social engineering, specifically exploiting the siloed nature of large corporate departments. A modern fraudster will initiate the attack with a simple phone call. They call the main switchboard of a massive corporation and ask to be connected to the accounts receivable department.
Okay.
When a low-level clerk answers, the fraudster assumes the persona of a vendor. They say something like, "Hi, we are finally getting ready to pay that massive invoice you sent us last month, but our accounting department prefers to wire the funds directly. Can you please provide your specific wiring instructions?"
And the clerk, whose entire job performance is based on bringing money into the company, is thrilled. They want that invoice paid.
So without verifying the caller's identity, they readily read off the exact name of the bank, the corporate routing number, and the specific account number. Step 1 is complete. The fraudster has the target data.
But a check needs authorized signatures to clear.
So the fraudster hangs up, calls the main switchboard back, and this time asks for the corporate communications or investor relations department.
They pivot to a different department.
Exactly. They request a physical copy of the company's latest annual report to be mailed to them, or they simply download the PDF from the company's website.
Because almost every corporate annual report, usually right around page 3, features a letter to the shareholders.
And at the bottom of that letter, you will invariably find the exact high-resolution, professionally printed signatures of the chairman of the board, the chief executive officer, and the chief financial officer.
The fraudster now possesses the bank name, the account numbers, and the precise authorized signatures of the executives with signing authority.
They plug this data into off-the-shelf design software, printed onto standard paper to ensure smooth edges and non-magnetic ink.
Intentionally triggering the modern equivalent of the float.
Yes, and they deploy runners to cash these checks at disparate branches. The system is still vulnerable to the exact same human oversight.
It perfectly illustrates that the weakest link in any security apparatus, whether in 1965 or 2025, isn't the firewall or the encryption. It's the human being answering the phone who genuinely wants to be helpful.
It's always the human element.
Always. So we have spent the first half of this deep dive establishing 2 monumental things. First, the glamorous cinematic myth of the teenage mastermind who conquered the globe. And second, the very real, highly technical mechanics of how financial fraud actually operates, both then and now.
The setup.
The setup. Now, I want you, the listener, to sit with this for a moment. Imagine believing this incredible story of the jet-setting pilot, doctor, and lawyer for decades. You've read the best-selling autobiography, you've seen the Steven Spielberg movie, you've watched Leonardo DiCaprio charm his way across the screen.
Embodying this irresistible rogue.
Right. Only to find out that the entire foundation of the story, the timeline, the locations, the professions, the millions of dollars, is an absolute mirage. Let's talk about the unraveling.
When journalists do the math.
Exactly. Let's look at what happens when journalists finally decide to stop repeating the legend and start pulling the thread.
The unraveling of the Abagnale myth is a true testament to the power of primary source documentation. For decades, the media largely took his claims at face value. He was charming, he made for great television, and frankly, it was a much better story if it was true.
It's what people wanted to hear.
But recently, investigators decided to apply actual journalistic rigor to the timeline. We mentioned them earlier. Alan C. Logan spent years digging through archives for his book, and Javier Leiva utilized modern investigative techniques to track down actual witnesses and public records for his podcast.
When Logan pulled the actual New York State prison records, what was the process? Because you don't just Google a 1965 inmate number.
No, this was painstaking archival work, and what he found completely obliterates the timeline of the Hollywood movie. It is the ultimate bombshell.
Lay it out for us.
Logan accessed the physical archival records from the New York State Department of Corrections. He found the intake and release cards for Frank Abagnale Jr. The public records show definitively that Abagnale was incarcerated in Great Meadow Prison in Comstock, New York. He was processed as inmate number 25367.
And the dates of that incarceration are the entire key to the deception.
According to the state records, he was locked in that facility from July 26, 1965 until December 24, 1968. He was physically imprisoned in upstate New York from the age of 17 to the age of 20.
Just think about the sheer cognitive dissonance here.
It's staggering.
During the exact same years, he was supposedly sipping martinis in first class on flights to Paris, Tokyo, and London. During the exact same months, he claimed to be pulling midnight shifts as a brilliant pediatrician in a Georgia hospital and studying for the bar exam in Louisiana.
He was actually sitting in a concrete cell in Great Meadow Prison.
The physical timeline makes the entire grand global adventure mathematically impossible. He could not have flown 1,000,000 miles or cashed $2.5 million in checks across 26 countries because he was locked in a cage in Comstock, New York.
It completely dismantles the core premise of his entire public identity. The grand adventure never happened.
But that revelation naturally forces a much darker question. If the cinematic story was a fabrication, what actually happened? Where did the pilot persona even originate? And who were the real victims of his actual crimes?
The reality that the investigators uncovered is vastly smaller in scale and significantly more predatory than the movie ever portrayed.
What's the real pilot story?
Well, Abagnale did, in fact, acquire a pilot's uniform, but his stint wearing it didn't last for years. It lasted for mere weeks.
Okay.
And he didn't use it to infiltrate the highest echelons of international aviation. According to the exhaustive interviews conducted by Leva and Logan, he used the uniform primarily as a tool for psychological manipulation and stalking.
Who was the target?
The journalist tracked down a woman named Paula Parks. In the 1960s, she was a flight attendant. Abagnale crossed paths with her while he was wearing a pilot's uniform. And her account of what followed is deeply unsettling and strips away any veneer of the charming rogue.
How did he utilize the uniform in this specific instance? Because it wasn't about cashing checks, it was about access.
He used the perceived authority of the uniform to deceive airline personnel and obtain Paula Parks' private, highly guarded flight schedule.
Wow.
Once he had her schedule, he began systematically following her all over the eastern seaboard. She would arrive for a shift at an airport hundreds of miles from her home base, and he would be standing there at the gate waiting for her.
That is the textbook definition of stalking.
It really is, and it escalated. Yeah. She actively tried to distance herself from him. At one point, she explicitly told him she was leaving New Orleans and flying to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to seek refuge and visit her family.
And instead of taking the very obvious hint, Abagnale essentially invited himself along.
He manipulated the situation entirely. He presented himself to her parents in Baton Rouge as a respectable, furloughed pilot who was just down on his luck between assignments.
And her parents believed him.
Trusting the uniform and the persona, they welcomed him into their home. He ended up staying with the Parks family for weeks, eating their food, sleeping under their roof.
And this is the moment where the central pillar of his entire mythology, the claim that he never targeted individuals, collapses completely.
Because he stole from them.
Yes. While he was enjoying the hospitality of this family in Baton Rouge, he wasn't masterminding corporate espionage against a faceless bank. He was systematically stealing from the people who had taken him in.
He stole blank checks directly from the Parks family checkbook. He also stole checks from local small businesses in the Baton Rouge area.
He victimized his hosts.
He ultimately forged a series of checks totaling around $1,200. He victimized the very people who offered him sanctuary.
There is a quote from Paula Parks Campbell, recorded by the investigators, that carries an immense emotional weight. When asked about Abagnale's famous public claim that he only went after big businesses, she said, "He said he never hurt little people. That's the one that sticks in my craw. My mama's heart was broken."
That is the true human cost of fraud that is entirely erased in the glamorous Hollywood retelling. The victims of his real crimes weren't insured corporations. They were kind, everyday people whose trust was deeply violated.
And the trauma of that betrayal doesn't fade, even 50 years later?
It doesn't.
And once that central lie is exposed, the rest of the mythology unravels with alarming speed. Let's take a sledgehammer to the rest of these massive claims.
Yeah.
What about the epic, multi-year cat-and-mouse game with the FBI? The relentless pursuit by the Tom Hanks character, Agent Carl Hanratty.
It is total fiction. There was no Carl Hanratty. There was no massive, highly funded FBI task force dedicated to hunting down a teenage criminal mastermind across multiple continents.
So how was he caught?
Investigative journalists spoke with retired FBI agents who were actually stationed in the region during his eventual arrest. They confirmed that Abagnale was apprehended quite easily in Marietta, Georgia.
No airplane escape.
It's no dramatic chase. Local authorities received a mundane tip that a young man matching his description was staying at a local Squire Inn. They walked into his motel room and arrested him without incident.
And what about the staggering financial claims? He built a career telling audiences he cashed $2.5 million in bad checks.
Federal court records document the stark reality. When he was finally convicted and sentenced, it wasn't for a multi-million-dollar global enterprise.
What was the real number?
He was convicted of forging a total of 10 Pan Am checks across 5 domestic states. The total monetary value of the fraud he was convicted of was less than $1,500.
Less than $1,500.
The gap between the myth and the court record is absurd.
And the professional aliases. The Louisiana bar exam.
Completely debunked. Journalists contacted the Louisiana State Bar Association and had them reconcile all the testing records from that era, cross-referencing every known alias Abagnale ever used. The Bar Association definitively proved he never sat for, let alone passed, the exam.
And the Attorney General job.
Furthermore, the State Attorney General's office confirmed he was never employed there in any capacity whatsoever.
And the midnight shift as a pediatrician in Georgia.
Cobb General Hospital administrators dug into their historical staffing records. They confirmed that the specific position he described, a regular, dedicated, overnight pediatrician supervising a ward from midnight to 8 a.m., didn't even exist at their hospital during that time period.
The entire scenario was fabricated.
Yes. But as the journalists dug deeper, they did uncover one medical claim that is rooted in reality, and it is incredibly disturbing.
University of Arizona incident.
Right. The sources reveal that while he was posing in his pilot uniform at the University of Arizona, he utilized the persona for explicitly predatory purposes. He lied to young female college students, telling them he was actively recruiting for Pan Am flight crews.
Under that false guise of authority, he fraudulently conducted physical exams on these young women.
It is a horrific detail to uncover. What he later spun in his autobiography as a charming, victimless prank was, in reality, a severe violation and an act of sexual predation.
It completely reframes his character. We are no longer looking at a lovable, mischievous rogue. We are looking at someone who was deeply manipulative and willing to exploit the vulnerability of others for his own gratification.
Absolutely.
So let's summarize the actual reality of Frank Abagnale Jr. based on the documentary evidence. We have a man who spent his most critical formative years locked in a New York State prison. Upon release, he used a pilot uniform to stalk a flight attendant, stole $1,500 from a kind family and local businesses, and lied entirely about passing the bar and being a doctor.
He wasn't a mastermind. He was a low-level, opportunistic con man.
Which brings us to the most perplexing question of this entire deep dive. How on earth does a thoroughly debunked, small-time fraudster manage to leverage those exact lies into becoming one of the most highly paid, respected, and sought-after cybersecurity consultants in the world today?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that transition is arguably the greatest con he ever pulled. And it speaks volumes about the mechanics of modern media and our collective desire to believe a compelling narrative.
How did he build the modern consulting career?
When Abagnale was finally released from his federal sentence in 1974, he faced the reality of a criminal record. Holding down a legitimate job was difficult, but he quickly realized something profound. While employers were repelled by his criminal past, the general public was absolutely captivated by his tales of deception.
He realized the story was the asset.
Exactly. He leaned into the public's fascination. He essentially decided that if society was going to label him a con man, he was going to brand himself as the world's greatest con man. He started embellishing the stories, booking minor speaking engagements, and slowly building the mythology.
Fast forward to today, and the scale of his success is staggering. He lives in a multi-million-dollar estate on Daniel Island in Charleston, South Carolina. According to the Speaker Bureau records analyzed by investigators, his standard fee for a single corporate keynote address is $27,000.
He has built a veritable empire on this fabricated narrative. He claims to have consulted with over 14,000 financial institutions, massive corporations, and law enforcement agencies globally,
He is treated as a supreme authority on fraud.
making regular television appearances, acting as a high-level advisor for major credit bureaus like Experian, and authoring best-selling books on fraud prevention.
But the investigative journalists who uncovered the truth didn't just publish their findings and walk away. They actively sought to hold him accountable. There is an incredibly dramatic confrontation detailed in Javier Leiva's Pretend podcast that perfectly captures the tension between the myth and the reality.
The Vegas confrontation.
Yes, in 2022, Leiva attended a major technology conference in Las Vegas where Abagnale was delivering a keynote address. Leiva managed to navigate the crowd, get face-to-face with Abagnale, and confronted him directly with the archival public records.
He literally pulled out the copy of the New York prison intake card showing the exact dates Abagnale was locked up.
How did Abagnale react?
Abagnale's response in that moment is highly revealing of how he navigates exposure. When faced with irrefutable physical documentary evidence that contradicted his entire life story, he didn't confess. He attempted to seamlessly shift the blame.
Kuhu.
He tried to backtrack by claiming that he didn't actually write the autobiography. He asserted that his co-author, a man named Stan Redding, had wildly exaggerated the details to sell more books, and that Steven Spielberg had further fictionalized the narrative for the Hollywood movie.
He tried to throw the co-author under the bus.
He essentially tried to amputate himself from the very myth that he had spent decades monetizing.
But there is a massive, gaping logical flaw in that defense. The timeline of his own media appearances betrays him.
Exactly. The investigators anticipated this defense and dug into television archives. They retrieved broadcast footage from 1977.
And the book came out when?
Keep in mind, the autobiography wasn't published until 1980. But in 1977, years before the book existed, Abagnale was appearing on massive national television programs like To Tell the Truth and The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson.
Telling the lies himself.
In those interviews, he is sitting on camera directly telling the exact same massive lies. He is telling Carson about the 1,000,000 miles flown, the midnight pediatrician job, the bar exam, and the dramatic escapes. He was the primary architect and distributor of the myth long before a co-author or a Hollywood director ever touched the story.
Beyond the Hollywood narrative, he also heavily relies on his supposed intimate relationship with the FBI to legitimize his modern consulting business.
The Clarence Kelly story.
Right. For decades, he has told audiences that former FBI Director Clarence Kelly personally intervened to pull him out of prison. He claims Kelly tasked him with highly classified, off-the-books undercover missions. Things like memorizing complex missile components and infiltrating heavily guarded military bases and secret laboratories in New Mexico.
Which, when you speak to actual federal law enforcement professionals, is absurd.
Right, retired agents call this out.
Retired FBI agents completely reject these claims. Jerry Williams, a retired agent who spent her career specializing in major white-collar crime, bluntly called the narrative entirely fabricated. She pointed out that the FBI does not operate like a spy novel. The director of the FBI does not personally recruit teenage check forgers for classified military espionage.
And the FBI's official institutional stance on Abagnale is incredibly muted, almost intentionally vague.
That they don't want to engage with it.
When journalists press them for confirmation of his heroic undercover status, they acknowledge that he does give lectures at the FBI Academy from time to time. But they explicitly, officially deny that he was ever on the 10 most wanted list, a claim he used to make constantly in his marketing materials.
And they definitively deny he was ever given special undercover operational status or official commendations.
It is a masterclass in rhetorical pivoting. When confronted with the glaring discrepancies in his past, he often retreats behind the impenetrable shield of the FBI.
He suggests, with a wink and a nod, that his true activities were classified, or that the records were sealed as part of his government service.
It allows him to maintain an aura of unassailable, almost mystical authority that cannot be fact-checked by the general public.
But here is the ultimate twist, the central paradox that makes this deep dive so fascinating. Despite the fact that his entire origin story is a fabricated Hollywood myth, and despite his decades of deception,
The advice is actually good.
the actual security advice he delivers in those $27,000 keynotes today is incredibly valuable. The data he shares about modern cyber threats is real, it is terrifying, and it is entirely accurate.
This is the bizarre reality of Frank Abagnale today. The messenger is deeply flawed, But the message is vital. He may have lied about being a hotshot pilot in the 1960s, but he is absolutely telling the truth about the catastrophic vulnerabilities in our digital infrastructure right now.
In his 2025 seminars, he moves past the check forgery and highlights the sheer, incomprehensible scale of modern data theft. He notes that in 2024 alone, over 3.6 billion individual identity records were compromised in corporate data breaches.
He points out that there are currently more than 14 billion identity records available for purchase in bulk on the dark web. But the most chilling warning he gives is aimed directly at parents.
This is a huge point.
He explains that a child's identity is actually the most lucrative and highly sought-after target for modern identity thieves.
And if you think about it, the logic is deeply connected to his own youthful desire for a blank slate. A child has a pristine, entirely unmonitored credit history.
They aren't checking their credit score at age 10.
Exactly. A fraudster can steal a 10-year-old social security number, attach it to a new identity, open credit cards, take out massive loans, and default on all of them. And the crime won't be discovered for nearly a decade until that child turns 18 and tries to apply for their first student loan or apartment lease.
He also addresses the staggering financial losses occurring at the federal level. He cites that massive government programs like Medicare and Medicaid paid out over $100 billion in fraudulent claims recently.
This isn't just bureaucratic waste.
No, this is organized syndicates billing for ghost patients and fictitious medical equipment, exploiting the sheer volume of claims processing, in the same way 1960s forgers exploited the automated clearinghouses.
But his overarching thesis regarding cybersecurity always comes back to one point. Hackers rarely cause catastrophic breaches through brute force Hollywood-style technological wizardry. Almost every major breach is caused by a human being making a mistake.
He illustrates this with the classic flash drive in the parking lot test, right?
Yes. He talks about physical penetration tests, where security firms simply scatter a dozen infected USB flash drives in the employee parking lot of a major, highly secured corporation.
And what happens?
Inevitably, despite millions of dollars spent on firewall architecture, an employee will pick one up. Human curiosity takes over. They walk into the building, plug the unknown drive directly into their networked corporate computer to see what's on it, and instantly bypass the entire security apparatus from the inside.
The technology worked perfectly. Human psychology failed.
To combat this, he boils down his advice into what we can consider the golden rules of scams. He tells his audiences that the method of delivery doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a sophisticated phishing email, a frantic phone call from someone claiming to be the IRS, or a text message about a failed package delivery.
There are two universal red flags.
Two red flags present in almost every single scam. Number one, they demand money or information immediately. They intentionally create a false, high-stress sense of urgency so that the victim doesn't have the time to stop, breathe, and think critically.
And number two.
Number two, they wait for you to open the door. The system is usually secure until you voluntarily hand over the password, the account number, or the access code. They rely on your compliance.
It is deeply practical, actionable, and necessary advice for navigating the modern digital landscape. And it leaves us grappling with a very strange, uncomfortable reality.
The man delivering the absolute best advice on how not to be conned built his entire platform, his wealth, and his legacy on the ultimate con.
It has been a truly wild ride today. We have covered a massive amount of ground. We started by examining the glamorous, cinematic myth of the brilliant teenage imposter and the psychological reasons why society loved that story.
We dug deep into the gritty, highly technical realities of financial fraud.
From smooth-edged paper to the specific chemistry of magnetic iron oxide ink, and the brilliant exploitation of bank float times. We followed the relentless, painstaking work of investigative journalists who dug through New York prison archives and tracked down actual victims to finally unravel a 50-year-old fabrication.
And finally, we looked at how that very myth, once exposed, was seamlessly weaponized into a highly lucrative, entirely legitimate modern cybersecurity career.
So as we wrap up, we have to ask, why does all of this matter? What is the core takeaway for you, the listener, beyond learning how to spot a fake check or a phishing email?
I believe the greatest lesson of the Frank Abagnale story is a profound lesson in media literacy and the mechanics of human belief. We, as a society, collectively allowed a man to rewrite his history of petty, predatory, and harmful crimes into a charming, victimless adventure.
Because we simply liked the story better than the boring, grim truth.
The narrative of the clever kid beating the monolithic system was just too entertaining to subject to basic fact-checking. True critical thinking requires us to actively question our assumptions, to demand primary sources, and most importantly, to be willing to dismantle even our absolute favorite cultural legends when the facts demand it.
I couldn't agree more. It is about demanding the truth, even when the fiction is vastly more entertaining. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, incredibly provocative thought to mull over. Throughout this entire deep dive, we have been analyzing Frank Abagnale Jr. as a unique, isolated anomaly.
A singular mastermind of deception who emerged from a broken home.
But as I was reading through the investigative materials compiled by Javier Leiva's podcast, a truly startling historical detail jumped out that we haven't touched on yet.
It is a fascinating footnote that entirely shifts the context of the story.
It turns out Frank Abagnale wasn't the only con artist in his family.
No, he wasn't.
His older brother also lived a life defined by profound deception. The archival records reveal that his brother used multiple aliases throughout his life, entirely faked a professional career as a therapist, and possessed a dark, puzzling criminal history of his own, completely separate from Frank's high-profile antics.
It changes everything we thought we knew about the Abagnale origin story. It's no longer about a single boy reacting to a divorce.
Exactly. It raises a haunting psychological question for you to explore on your own. Does the art of the steal run in the blood? Is there some sort of deep, genetic predisposition to pathological deception? Or is it a learned survival tactic, a dark, necessary psychological adaptation born from whatever was truly happening inside that fractured home they both grew up in?
It makes you wonder if the greatest mystery isn't how Frank Abagnale fooled the world, but what kind of environment actually produces two brothers who independently choose to live their entire lives in the shadows of false identities.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked some new questions, challenged your perspectives on a story you thought you knew, and gave you a lot to think about. Until next time, keep questioning the narrative.